Today, we're diving into the story of a creature that's both a chef's dream and, well, a biologist's nightmare. It's the Australian red claw crayfish. In the Philippines, this little guy represents a massive economic opportunity, but it's also hiding a secret that could seriously threaten the entire country's ecosystem.
And that brings us right to the heart of the matter. How do you cash in on a popular, lucrative food source when that same animal could cause permanent, irreversible damage to the environment? It's a very tricky tightrope the Philippine government is trying to walk right now.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. We'll start with the dilemma itself, then we'll uncover that hidden threat. After that, we'll get into the government's master plan, look at the specific rules for farmers, see what happens if you break them, and finally, we'll connect it all to that bigger question of balancing profit and the planet.
Okay, first up, let's unpack this delicious dilemma. Because on one hand, you have this huge opportunity, but on the other, a really serious risk.
You can see this tension laid out right there in the official government documents. They talk about incredible economic potential, boosting aquaculture, creating jobs for small farmers, improving food security. But the flip side of that coin is a potential ecological disaster just waiting to happen if these crayfish ever get loose. It's a classic high-stakes, high-reward situation.
So what's all the fuss about? I mean, why is the government being so cautious? To really get it, we need to look closer at the specific threat these crayfish pose.
The key term you need to know here is invasive species. And look, this isn't just about an animal being in a new place. An invasive species is a troublemaker. It actively causes harm by outcompeting native animals for food, by wrecking habitats, and by throwing entire ecosystems completely out of whack, sometimes forever.
And this isn't just some vague worry. The science backing these new rules is solid. A technical working group from the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources, or BFAR, they did a full-on risk assessment, and their conclusion? It was crystal clear. In the Philippines, the Australian red claw crayfish is officially classified as a highly invasive species.
So the problem has a name, highly invasive species. Okay, so what's the solution? Let's dig into the government's master plan.
The government's entire strategy really hinges on this one core concept, the controlled environment. See, they aren't banning crayfish farming outright. What they're saying is that it can only happen in facilities where escape is pretty much impossible. So think sealed concrete tanks, fiberglass containers, not open-air earthen ponds where they could just crawl away. This whole plan is built on 5 main pillars. First, like we just said, farming only in controlled environments. Second, every single farm has to follow super strict biosecurity rules. Third, you can't just decide to start a farm. You have to get officially accredited by BFAR. Fourth, the government is controlling where the baby crayfish, the craylings, come from. And finally, if you break these rules, well, the penalties are designed to hurt.
Okay, so what does this all actually mean for a farmer on the ground? Let's take a look at their new playbook. The path to operating legally is laid out very, very clearly. First, a farmer has to get their facility accredited by BFAR. Then, they can't just buy their stock from anyone, they have to get their crayflings from another BFAR-accredited hatchery. If they want to move their crayfish from point A to point B, they need a special transport permit. And through it all, they have to follow a strict set of good aquaculture practices. The regulations are just as clear about what you absolutely cannot do. Raising them in earthen ponds? Forbidden. Using cages in rivers or lakes? Nope, that's banned too. Releasing them into public waters is a huge no-no. You can't even raise them alongside other fish, at least for now. And this is a big one. These rules are only for the Australian red claw. Farming any other kind of crayfish is completely off the table. And what about bringing in new breeding stock from other countries? The plan has a 3-layered defense for that. Think of it like security checkpoints. First, BFAR can inspect the facility in the farm country before anything is even shipped. Then, there's a strict inspection of documents and samples right there at the border. And finally, once they're in the Philippines, the imports go into a mandatory quarantine where they're watched very closely. So, the government has this really detailed set of rules. But let's be honest, rules are only as good as their enforcement. So let's look at the consequences if you decide not to follow them.
Let's start with one of the most serious offenses you can commit: bringing in a foreign species without getting the green light. This one goes right to the heart of preventing an ecological disaster.
And the penalty is, well, it's staggering. Violators can face a fine of up to 1 million pesos. The government is sending a very clear signal here. This is not a risk they are messing around with.
But it isn't just about illegal imports. There are also some really heavy penalties for just operating without a license or for not following those day-to-day rules for safe farming.
The financial stakes are just huge. If you're running an unauthorized farm, that could cost you up to 1 million pesos. But look at this other one. The penalty for bad practices, things like not managing your waste properly, that can be up to 100,000 pesos per day until you fix it. For a small farmer, a rolling fine like that isn't just a penalty, it's a business ender. The pressure to do things by the book is immense.
All right, let's zoom out for a second. When you step back from all the specific rules and the big scary fines, you start to see a much bigger story unfolding here.
This whole thing is about so much more than just crayfish. What we're looking at here is a real-world blueprint for sustainable development. It's a model that tries to say yes to economic growth and opportunity, but only inside a strict framework that's designed to protect the country's natural heritage.
And that leaves us with one final critical question. The plan is ambitious, it's detailed, and it definitely has teeth. But its success is going to come down to one thing: enforcement. So will this carefully designed blueprint for crayfish farming become a global model for how to do things right? Or will it become another cautionary tale about an invasive species that got away? Honestly, only time will tell.